Ahoy! With today's update 8.6, Morgan Le Fay's ability were fully revealed and we are going to take a closer look at them and also break them down in a little bit more detail. To quickly summarize her playstyle first, on the patch notes she was described as an artillery mage. She is very damage focused and comes with decent crowd control and is primarily designed for middle lane but doesn't have an escape. There is some synergy between her abilities, but most of it comes from her passive. She has limited sustain, she only gets some sustain from her ultimate, and she has various kinds of punish when she's getting chased by an enemy. Her basic attacks with the floaty sword are ranged, and she actually has attacks that look somewhat similar to Vulcan's. We'll look at her passive, Empowered Blade, a little bit later. For now you just need to know that this stacks runes with different effects. The first ability is Sigil Mastery. This ability has 3 different versions and you choose them kinda like Tiamat Ultimate or Raijin Ultimate. So when you first press that ability, you then have to choose which version of it you want to drop. All 3 versions share a cooldown, so you can only use one at a time. When you activate the ability, a magical sword crashes from the sky and initially deals damage in a small circle. This damage scales from 65 to 185 base with 55% magical power scaling. While the concept is similar to Heimdall's 1, this ability seems to be a lot quicker. After this initial damage, a secondary larger radius activates and also deals damage. This is from 40 to 100 and scales with 35% of your magical power. The secondary ring applies additional effects to enemies. The red ring will fear enemies away from the center of that area for 1 second, the green ring will slow enemies in that area for 4 seconds, and the purple ring spawns a decoy that attacks enemies. There's no information about the scaling of this decoy, and in the patch show they didn't use any items, so we don't know how much extra damage output this decoy can lead to or how it can be destroyed. What we know is that the decoy lasts for 4 seconds. The slow on the slow field is 35%. Each of the different versions of the ability also applies a different mark. It has a base cooldown of 10 seconds, meaning you could get all 3 effects applied to an enemy in 20 seconds. So the use of all 3 different versions is encouraged in order to activate your full passive. When it comes to clearing with this ability, keep in mind that it has a relatively small radius, especially on the first part, and the second part deals less damage, so it's probably not going to be your primary clear. Her second ability is Dragonflight. Here she summons a dragon apparition from the ground that then charges forward. The initial part of the area has a wide rectangular area in front of her and will knock up enemies. This deals 50 to 130 damage with 35% scaling. The secondary area is more like a line ability, where the dragon charges forward and deals 75 to 175 base damage and 50% scaling. This part will knock back enemies. If an enemy is right in front of you, where both parts of the ability meet, then they will be hit by both the knock-up and the following knockback, as well as both instances of damage. So this is where the very strong self-peel of this ability comes from. This ability also applies a different mark and can set up the 1 or 3 because of the relatively long CC. In the update show, both Ajax and Clumsy said that it's relatively risky to use this ability for clearing, since it is one of your main emergency safety abilities. Based on the animation that we can see, it also seems to have a fair bit of a wind-up, and it can apparently be juked quite well. Looking at the damage values of this ability, it doesn't seem super strong for clearing purposes at later stages, because it kind of falls off in terms of damage output anyways, but it does have relatively high damage on rank 1 when it comes to clearing on the first wave or something, though it is worth pointing out that it also starts with a 16 seconds cooldown. This cooldown scales down by 1 second per rank, ending up at 12 seconds at max rank. Her third ability is Shroud of Wildfire. Projectile-wise, this ability is very similar to Hell's 1. It's a line ability where she throws forward a fireball, and then if it stops, it'll detonate in a small circle. And this can either happen by it reaching the end of the line ability, or by it stopping on a guard. The ability will not stop on minions and will pass through them. The initial base damage of the line attack is 80 to 200 with 30% scaling, so it's relatively low. The detonation circle itself doesn't deal any damage, but applies damage over time to the enemies affected by it. This damage is 5 to 25 per tick, plus 5% scaling, and the ability has 4 ticks over 4 seconds. However, if an enemy uses an escape while affected by this damage over time, they will take additional bonus damage. This bonus damage is 60 up to 180 plus 20% scaling, so almost the normal damage of the ability. On the other hand, it seems like if you use an escape, the bonus damage will remove the additional damage over time from you. So if you need to use an escape in those 4 seconds while you're affected, you might as well use it at the start. Additionally, this ability provides you with a movement speed buff for 4 seconds. This buff gives you 16 to 24% movement speed depending on rank and is activated just by using the ability. So you don't need to land it, meaning if you're getting chased, you can just throw it forward and get a little bit of a movement speed boost. Similar to Poseidon, you can also use this to rotate around the map quicker, though the maximum boost isn't quite as high at max rank. When you hit an enemy affected by the burn with a basic attack, the duration of the burn debuff will be extended, meaning enemies take additional damage over time and are disencouraged from using escapes for longer. In the patch though, it seemed like the ability would expire at some point anyways though. I don't know how much the extension is, but it seemed like even if you were to build attack speed, the damage over time would expire eventually. Also, the additional damage over time is obviously very low, so it's probably not worth trying to build her attack speed focused. What wasn't shown is what happens if you hit the secondary part of the ability on minions, and if the damage over time will apply to them as well. That would help this ability's clear by giving it 100 base damage on rank 1 if you land the circle part on the archers. The combined scaling of 50% would still obviously be relatively low. Much like all others, this ability also applies a mark, and the cooldown is 13 seconds. And now it's finally time to talk about a passive, because that plays directly into the ultimate. The passive is called Empowered Blade. This passive actually uses marks in 2 different ways. When Morgan Le Fay uses an ability that marks an enemy god, a mark is applied to the enemy, and at the same time a symbol is activated on Morgan's sword. This is very important to keep apart, so mark is on the enemy, symbol is on yourself on your sword. Each symbol that is activated provides you with additional magical power. That is 2 plus 0.4 per level, or 10 magical power at level 20. So if you have 4 symbols activated on the sword, you will have 40 additional magical power. If what the dev said on the patch notes is correct, then the symbols on the sword don't expire. They are almost permanent. So if you hit an enemy with 2 versions of your 1, your 2 and your 3, then you could walk around with up to 40 permanent bonus power, depending on your level, of course. However, once you hit an enemy with the last ability, so likely the version of your 1 that you didn't use, the 5th symbol activates and Morgan Le Fay becomes empowered, gaining double the magical power buff from the passive, so a total of 100 magical power, and reducing the cooldown of her ultimate, consuming power, by 10 seconds. This empowered effect lasts for 10 seconds, and after that the symbols on your sword seem to deactivate. So the game really wants you to use your ult once you have all the symbols activated, which kinda refers back to an earlier teaser for her as well. The marks on enemies, on the other hand, last for 30 seconds, and you can hit them with up to 5 marks as well. You can even hit multiple enemies with the same mark. The enemies can't see which marks they hit with, but the debuff bar will show the number of marks they have on them. And this is where the ultimate consuming power comes into play. The first part of this ult is a large cone-shaped attack. This will trigger all the marks on enemies in that cone area. Each activated mark, depending on the rank, deals between 25 to 85 base damage plus 5% scaling, which can be pretty significant damage in late game. The number of marks that is consumed in this part then affects the width of the projectiles of the secondary part of the ability. It wasn't specified how this interacts with multiple marks on multiple enemies, but I would assume it has a cap at 5 marks either way. So after the marks are consumed, Morgan rises into the air, becomes crowd control immune, and can fire 3 strikes. The damage of these strikes is unaffected by the marks, only the width, and each of them deals 90 to 250 base damage plus 40% scaling. The ability also works without any marks consumed at all, but in that case the width is quite small. While using the ability, Morgan is crowd control immune and has omnidirectional movement speed. For example, like Chang'e, who has that during her abilities, where you move at the same speed in any direction, even backwards. This is something that I mentioned with her having nice self-peel while getting chased. She could just turn around and use her ultimate and just run away at the same speed while dealing damage to the enemy. The ability can also be cancelled at any point. A secondary, very important part of these 3 projectiles is that all of them heal Morgan Le Fay. They heal her for 11 to 15% of her missing health per hit, and when hitting multiple targets, subsequent heals are reduced by 50%, but that's still 7.5% per additional target. But keep in mind that this scales with your missing health and not your maximum health, so unless you have very low health when using the ult, you're not gonna see insane heal values from this. The duration of the ability is 4 seconds, so it's also quite a long time to be crowd control immune and have that omnidirectional movement speed to get away from someone. And its cooldown is 90 seconds, 80 seconds if you have the passive active. From what I can tell, it seems like the ultimate swings don't scale with your own attack speed. Not 100% sure on that though. While most of her base damage values seem relatively low, the ultimate is definitely the exception here and seems to be the key aspect of her kit. Everything you do essentially seems to be working towards getting the strongest version of your ult off whenever possible. This may explain why in some ways the base kit seems to be a little bit weaker. When it comes to her base stats, she seems to be closer to the mage carries than to normal mages. I can't see the full stats on level 1 yet, but on level 20 she has 74 physical protection, which is 4 more than Freya or 14 more than Poseidon, and she has 1970 base health. That is 39 less than Freya, but 250 more than Poseidon, for example. So she definitely seems to fit in more with the mage carries in terms of tankiness, and will likely also have higher protection values on level 1. Since so much of your kit seems to hinge on the runes and the ultimate, I think cooldown reduction will be incredibly important on her, since that's the best way to apply all the runes from the 1 especially, and to get the ult up often. And she will likely be very mana hungry because her individual abilities still have pretty decent mana cost while not dealing that damage, so she's probably a god where Chronos Pendant will actually be pretty potent. PTS for her will go live on Friday and we'll find out more about her then, but the patch notes review will be coming later today or tomorrow depending on where you are, so if you want to see that and you're not subscribed yet, click like and subscribe, or I will go to my garage, hide in the corner, stare at my home gym and contemplate if it's harder for me to find the time to work out or for you. Thanks to my patrons for making this video possible. That's That Nick Walker, Dwayne Brennan, Lenta25 Green, Zilaria, Zed the Undead, Nevitz Jr., Rawas, Angel, Zifaroli, and everyone else you see here.